Hello, everybody. This is a remake of an interactive Zoom presentation that I originally made for the Gulf Coast Council of Returned Peace Corps volunteers. The idea behind the presentation was to enable all of us to get together, even though there is a pandemic going on. Each month, a different return volunteer, does a presentation on his or her experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in their host country. At any rate, there won't be any interactivity in this presentation, but you'll get an idea of what I did. The first part of the presentation involves a description of our training as Peace Corps volunteers. The second part of the presentation involves various photographs that I took and others took during the 2 years that we were in India. As part of the second part of the presentation, or my presentation today, I'm going to be reading some letters that I received, and the idea behind that was to give the return volunteers from the other countries the picture of what it was like for us to be in India for 2 years in 1965 to 1967. So let's get started. Started off with a photograph of that was taken towards the end of our training. That's us on top of the famous chicken coop. Gave them an example of the letter I believe each of us received from Sergeant Shriver. Amazingly enough, the new volunteers, especially those in the 21st century, really don't have that much of an idea of Sergeant Shriver, nor do they have an idea of the history of the Peace Corps. As part of the history of the Peace Corps during our time, you remember that our training was very intense. The training that the new volunteers undergo starts at 9 o'clock in the morning and lasts to about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It goes for 5 days a week. They were a bit surprised, or always very surprised, to find out that our training started at 7 o'clock in the morning and lasted till 10:30 at night, 5 days a week, and until 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturdays, and came with watching films about India on Sunday. Also, the new volunteers training is done mainly by host country nationals. This is a little tongue-in-cheek, but it emphasizes the idea that the newer trainees, if they use any resources at all, it's all internet-based, whereas our resources, of course, were book-based, book being the acronym for the Basic Organization of Knowledge. I described the immunizations we went through, and which I imagine all the trainees went through for the various groups, but us especially, because we had to get the gamma globulin shot. I'm certain everybody remembers that. Here's that's me and Chester and Lakshmi. Chester was one of the first trainees that I saw, and I remember I was a bit startled to see that he was wearing sandals instead of shoes. That was very radical in my opinion. Remember the Lady Bird Johnson visit that we made to her speech for the opening of that new park, or new section of the park? And that's when we had the famous Phil Scholl incident. This is about a moment before Phil said to Lady Bird Johnson, "It's a pleasure to meet the president." It's a pleasure to meet the power behind the president. And Lady Bird told Phil, "Oh no, I'm not the power behind the president. The president makes his own decisions." A reporter heard the conversation and seemed to be determined to put it in her report for her newspaper, and Phil wound up chasing that reporter down the street, begging her not to put that in her newspaper, in her news article. The next day he came into training, as I'm sure you'll all remember, wearing a Peace Corps dropout sweatshirt. Of course, he neither dropped out nor was thrown out. Our language training, I explained to the newer return volunteers lasted 5 hours a day, 2.5 hours in the morning, 2.5 hours in the afternoon, with only 4 people, I think it was, or maybe 5 at the most per class. Here's Tom with one of our trainers. I can't remember her name. Tom eventually, I worked with Tom in the village of Calady, where he developed a tilapia fish industry. This was taken during the Halloween party we had in October. Some people came in costume. That's Marilyn carrying oil. I said she's caught red-handed. I'm certain there was nothing but water or Kool-Aid in that bottle. We had two weeks in the Indian reservations in Wisconsin. I was on the Stockbridge-Muncie reservation. That's Norm Bell in the center, Julie Revere on the left. Norm, I think, dropped out, and Julie made it through training and then decide not to go to India during that 10-day break that we had. Norm and I shaving, everything had to be done outdoors. Language training went on. I think that's Mrs. Matthew, if I'm not mistaken. Our little group, the boys, built an outhouse. So I guess we're college graduates, but I have to say men. The men built an outhouse. There's the outhouse. That's me and Norm Bell about to jump into the river for bathing. There was no bathing facilities on that reservation. It's Cheryl Axtell laughing her head off and Dave Johnson on the left side of your screen. The completed outhouse. En route to India, that's Moon Mullins on my left, Henry Moon Mullins. Marilyn, I guess she's seated to my right. I don't know whose head that is. That's the back of that head that's in front of me. You notice that that airplane, I think it was a 727, did not have closed overhead compartments. So if we hit any rough air, all those items could have been on our heads. Chester, Michael, and Andrea spending their time on the airline, gambling and smoking. And yes, we were all wearing ties and jackets when we got on that plane. That's George Thompson to the left of your screen. Oops. And George Thompson to the left of your screen, Kathleen Sperry in the middle, Steve Sloan in the back, and Karen Thornberry with her head on Steve's shoulder. I believe that's Katie Brooks, or Katie Thomas's head peeking out from the right-hand side of your screen. Remember Phil Scholl's film that he made? Did an excellent job. I showed part of this to the group as part of my presentation, part of his film. I'll do a little bit here for you all. I have to say that Phil did an excellent job on this film. It was shot in 8mm. I think he shot 8 hours of film, which is a lot of film during the 2 years he was in India. He edited it down to, I believe, 1 hour. That's the ride into the Maidens Hotel. All the steam engines are gone now. That's Judy Clark. So at this point, what I did was to read letters that I had received from other volunteers from our group to give the return volunteers from the Gulf Coast Council an idea of the atmosphere in which we lived. First letter came from Dennis Best. Dear Dick, Essie, Dave, and Gay. Dick, I just opened your letter and it's great to hear about your setup. I really envy your location overlooking the Arabian Sea. My house is located about 100 feet from the railroad tracks. That Bombay special is driving me crazy. Actually, my place is pretty comfortable, although I haven't received my furniture yet. I've been to see the civil surgeon 4 times in Gwalior. It's always next week about the furniture. I hope I get it before the seminar. You know, I experienced my first case of Indian dysentery on the train from Delhi. It was a very unpleasant trip. When I arrived in Gwalior, a large city of 400,000 and only 23 miles from Dabra, I met 3 other Peace Corps volunteers, all of whom were going to Dabra. Dabra is a small place, about 45,000 people, but it's got its share of Peace Corps volunteers. I learn now that there's a nurse coming later this month. I've spent the past 2 weeks touring the nearby villages, checking out the government's nutrition program. Needless to say, it's in bad shape. But with 4 of us working, the others are in poultry and agri agriculture extension, we should be able to do something. I qualify that because in my brief experience with the administrators, things don't always work out as they should. That brings to mind the situation at the primary health center. The doctor here reminds me of Joseph Elder and the pugnacious Indian of the role-playing days. The guy is well known for his graft, and so far he's been an all-round bastard, if you will excuse the expression. I think most of my work will be with the agricultural extension officer. On the domestic side, I had a heck of a time finding a cook, but fortunately a couple of weeks ago I got a young Muslim and since have been trying to show him some American dishes. It's not always easy because he speaks no English. Although with 4 Peace Corps volunteers here, we might be in the same household. But I'm living alone. Not for long though. You know I told you about that nurse. Well, you'll never guess who she's supposed to live with. My long-lost sister. Since I was stationed alone, I haven't heard from any of my group, but B. Gould said we would have an orientation late in January. We went directly to our sites with no regional orientation in December, so I'll see them then. Actually, I was much closer to the Kerala group, and I sure hope I can get down there to see you there. I was thinking I might take some leave after the seminar, depending, of course, on where it's held. I'm only about 200 miles from Delhi, and I'm anticipating some official trips. So if for any reason you have occasion to go to Delhi, let me know. Well, Dick, I can't begin to tell you everything that's happened to me, and I know your experiences have been many too. I would like to hear about your activities at the primary health center. Hey, Essie, it's great to hear from you, even if you are writing small now. Been to any plays lately? I'd like to hear more about those trips to Trivandrum. Remember the Peace Corps image? Ha ha. Listen, Dave and Gay, I'm always available for advice. I'm sure Peace Corps Delhi would give me official leave. Sorry about that, Dave. Anyway, I hope I'll hear from you all soon. The next letter I received from Kathleen Argenbright, Argie, in January. It's dated January 15, 1966. Rich, so you've taken to the ocean, you old New York Cityer. What luck. I've seen it only 3 times since being here. Yesterday, we spent shopping in Calicut. Stopped by the part with its fishing fleet and carts. Wandered back with less 3 rupees. With a boy loaded with wood following behind. Blasted imperialists. At first I really rebelled against the role, but now have decided to accept it gracefully. Like wearing sandals or eating rice. What is the alternative? Of course, I keep explaining the necessity of accepting the role, which probably means I haven't, without feeling guilty. Anyway, I suspect that an old middle-class values rebel like yourself might have experienced the same trauma. I like to get the reaction from Miss Moose, even the Madhya Pradeshis like Linda Heidi, so the crew says are well housed, if lonely, sick, and isolated. Nancy and I have a 6-room manor with a veranda. All of us eat here, dining on the works of our jolly old British cook. How can we curse the British? Feasting, running around the countryside on Sunday, you know the scene, visiting the block development officer and so on. I like this place though. Never been homesick really. Shastri's death gave a sort of perspective to the thing, as if all of a sudden I were standing on a platform. Me, an American, addressing the Indian people, a sort of kinship, I guess. Not that the death was taken tragically, it wasn't, but a sort of sense of the fullness of our position as outsiders transcending the system, but accepted by people of all financial level and castes. Such freedom we never had at home. But freedom, I think, is hardest of all entities to handle. All my time, my own. Really? Can I accept it? My friend teaching in France found the same to be true with only a few hours of actual plan time. Do all peoples babble every hour like we do? Well, we are in the usual throes of theory here. The concrete so far consists of paper plans, which are good, and talk foundations, which are also good, for a poultry project. George and Phil would be doing it. It won't get off the ground for a while. Meanwhile, a basic school health program hitting the use of latrines, clean waters, and kitchen gardens. All verbal realities, of course. Anyway, does it matter? Yes, I've decided. What else do we have to offer? Our great American genius? I can't even get a good fire going for a meal without an hour's work. Oh well, the sun is beating down on the mid-morning palm trees. Time for a trip to the public health center to see what the scoop is. I don't know about coming down yet. Keep us informed, you old statesman. And the third letter, appropriately enough, from Marilyn Martini. There she is on the right side of your screen in a sorry. Dear Richard, we made it here, safe and sound, but thoroughly exhausted as it was 1:30 in the morning when we arrived. The trip itself went very rapidly since we all slept most of the way. Our medical officer, who we had met in Trivandrum, met us at the bus station with a small truck for our luggage. Rich, our house is really great. It's far from being rural. We're located right on the north-south highway that goes from Trivandrum to Canavera. Our house has a bus stop right in front, and it's a 10-minute ride to Trichur. The business section of Allure is just up the street, so everything is convenient. Werner, Diane, Karen, and Dick are located 12 miles north of us and must also come into Trichur for supplies, so we'll probably be seeing them before too long. Anyway, our house has all the potential of that place we went to in Trivandrum for the party. We each have our own room, plus there's an upstairs room, kitchen, and 2 other rooms that can be used as we see fit. We have a small enclosed front yard and a back porch with an extensive walled-in backyard. There's an Indian-style kakuza, an outhouse-type toilet, as if she had to explain it, attached to the house. The floors are red tile, and we have dark, shiny wood for windows, frames, and doors. With a whitewash job, it ought to look good. We have many problems, though, the main one being our open well. It's located about 15 feet from our septic tank, so it's boil everything. There's no running water, but we do have electricity. Jerry is temporarily located about 1.5 miles from us. He's a little depressed since he's alone and so far from us and the public health center, which is right next door to us. But the medical officer is looking for better accommodations for him. Trichur is as large as, if not larger than, Trivandrum, but from what little I've seen of it, it's not as clean and scenic as Trivandrum. Maybe I just haven't seen it all. Today, the medical officer gave us a car and driver to get into town for supplies. We concentrated first on kitchen supplies and food. Jerry called on the other Peace Corps volunteers in Trichur, India 16, poultry. One came in to have lunch with us, So that makes 8 of us from India 20A, 2 from India 16, and 1 German volunteer in Trichur. Ought to be good for some social life. Well, that was prescient. Tomorrow, we are registering with the police, going to the bank, and getting our ration cards for rice, sugar, and kerosene. Then we're coming back to clean from stem to stern. So I can see we're going to be more than busy over the next few days. Let me know how you're settling in. Say hello to Gay and Dave and ask them to write too. Did you get to go swimming yet? Oh yes. P.S. Forgot to tell you about some experiences we had today. We are like freaks in a sideshow. All afternoon, about 50 school-aged children gathered around our front gate. When any of them would see us, they'd laugh and squeal. They'd follow us around the street, all 50 of them, and into the shops. The staring and curiosity is much more intense here than in Trivandrum. Kind of gets on your nerves after a while. This morning, the midwife, sweeper, lady health visitor, and education extension worker came to the house to visit. They know English about the same way I know Malayalam, so we all had an interesting conversation. Looked like a game of charades. So that was it for the letters that I wrote, that I wrote. But I think they gave the return volunteers in Houston a fairly good idea of what life was like for us in India. See, Dennis actually made it down to Kerala. Remember the famine zone in Madhya Pradesh, and there was no famine in Kerala? So what did they send us in Kerala? Huge tins of Nutro biscuits. If you ate 8 Nutro biscuits a day, you would have enough nutrition to get you through the day. We used to give them out to visitors with tea. The Periyar River was the river that ran through Kaladi. I assume some of the other people or groups in Kerala also had Gerber's baby food to give out to hungry children. It was some sort of aid project or something. You know, I still think about what I would bring on a third-class reserve train to make that train ride more comfortable. Sleeping mat, light sheet. You know, I took all these photographs with a very inexpensive, what they call a half-frame camera. I'd never used a camera before. I went to Willoughby's in New York City and bought that. On one frame, negative frame, it took 2 photographs. Smokeless Chula. Not only are these the records in the Putinto Primary Health Center, when we visited that room, the person who was our guide told us that these were the valuable records of the Primary Health Center. Probably replaced by computers now. The snake boat races. This occurred, I think, once a year in Cochin in Kerala. It's sort of the equivalent of crew races that the Ivy League likes so much, except that you can just about count the people in those boats. Must be 25 to 30 people, and they rowed with their legs. Thousands, maybe 100,000 people would watch this at any one time. And these are people who are watching them. I explained that Kerala had three main populations, religions: Catholic, the Catholic religion, Islam, and of course the Hindu religion. And actually, there were a smattering of Jews in Cochin that had been there for about 1,000 years. Most of them have gone to Israel now. And their synagogue is cared for by Muslims. That's an interesting fact. I stayed in this hotel or hostel in Bombay, and that fellow had the bed right next to mine. I would say it would be extremely difficult to get a photograph like this in India right now, in Agra of the Taj Mahal, simply because there are so many tourists in India. When we were there were hardly any tourists at all. And we're getting to the close of what I showed the Houston area return volunteers. You'll remember this photograph, and all of you have a copy of it. So that was us, what, 35, 55 years ago? And transition to us about 2 years ago, 52 years ago. See, we all look the same. Even Michael, I think, is smiling a little bit. So that's about it. That's our website, india28.org. If you want to see Phil's entire film again, I suggest that you do, because it's really excellent. All you need to do is go to YouTube and use the search term India28, and it pops up as about the second or third item in the list. So bye-bye. I hope you, well, I should say namaste, and I hope you enjoyed this little presentation.